Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited today to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, all the way from Phoenix, Arizona in the USA, Genein Letford, who's the Chief Executive Officer at CAFFE Strategies, a business that equips organizations with strategies of intercultural creativity. Genein's also host of the Create and Grow podcast. Now, welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Genein. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
I'm excited to be here.
Kate Donovan, who was our guest on episode 512 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we have a conversation with you, Genein. So a big hello to Kate.
Yes. I'm just excited to be here, excited to be talking to you on this wonderful day, and just really ready to jump into the content.
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about all things. Well, I know creativity is big on your area of expertise and interest, and also you do a lot of work in the area of training intercultural competence, which I think is a really interesting concept that you've kind of developed and pulled together from areas of other people's work, but pulled together in a very unique way. And I'm really looking forward to exploring that some more. Now, tell us, what's the impact you're making in the world today, Genein?
Sure. In the words of Abraham Lincoln, when he was doing the Emancipation Proclamation, he said, if I'm going to be known for anything, it's going to be for this, and my whole soul is in it. And I feel the same way about intercultural creativity. If I'm going to be known for anything, it's going to be this work. And it's an interesting work that has met its time, an idea that has met its time, looking at the neuroscience to the psychology to the education, everything mixing together on how we can fully show up creatively with one another, and what's going behind the scenes, what's going on in front of the scenes, and just really what do we need to know to get ready for this future of work.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you've brought together a bunch of concepts there that usually people kind of look at in isolation, if I could put it that way. So creativity is a very big topic, and people talk about it in various forms, and I'm looking forward to exploring that one specifically. But then the idea of people working together to be creative together and to work across different cultures. And I think there's, that certainly is something today more than ever, where we have accessibility to people, like we're talking to one another across the world, like in different hemispheres and in different time zones, different on different days actually. and in that time and age, to take that opportunity to talk with people from all around the world that have different backgrounds and different experiences, and actually learn from that and be stronger as a community from that, I think is really powerful. Now, how did you kind of come to this journey of, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm here to do?
Sure. I have my background in elementary ed. So I taught kindergarten through fifth grade for 15 years. But during that, I started a nonprofit for the graduates of my elementary school. And so I ran a nonprofit for sixth grade through 12. And then I also taught at the local university for teachers getting their master's degree in integrative arts and creative arts. And I also sat on the board of a national nonprofit called DonorsChoose.org, with a powerful board of people running multi-million-dollar companies. So all of this happened basically in the same week. I would be working with a 4-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 24-year-old, and a 64-year-old, all in the same week, different educational levels. And so that put me at an interesting perspective to really say, okay, well, what are the really key skills, right? That these attributes that people have that really help increase their level of success, especially their level of success in a VUCA environment. That's a term, VUCA. It's a military term used by the business world now. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which is definitely what we experienced within the past 2 years. And so, like, who's really coming out on top and really still not just surviving, but thriving? And so I was doing work in creativity when I left the classroom in 2019. But then I realized that we are creative together. Like, you are affecting my brain's body budget, my metabolical budget right now as you're talking to me, smiling at me, and and people can do it in negative ways too. If you're doing negative threats, or just we have control, not control, we have influence over other people's emotional information, right? And so that told me that I could go into corporations and do tons of creative thinking training and thinking out of the box innovation. But if the culture is toxic, is not allowing curiosity to flourish, if people can't speak up, if the status quo can't ever be challenged, it doesn't matter how much training that I do. There's no creativity going on in that sphere. And so that's really the birth. I call it like a divine birth, but that's the birth of intercultural creativity. Talking about first redefining creativity. It's not just the arts. A lot of people think it's just the arts. The arts are a big part of it, and the arts can grow you in non-arts area, but it's about producing value, novelty, and just new ideas. And it's very much aligned with us being creative together. And so that was the birth of intercultural creativity.
Fantastic. And I'm curious about the neuroscience aspect of that. But before we get onto that, you said something there that I think is really important to emphasize, and that's the idea that creativity goes beyond just the arts. I know I've been guilty of this in the past. In fact, I do it consciously sometimes. We have an exercise where I get clients to draw things, and often people say, well, I can't really draw. And so I show them the drawing that I do for that particular exercise, and I say, now I'm the world's worst drawer of stick figures. And I have been known to say there's not a creative bone in my body related to drawing. And I've tempered that language because I realize that I'm telling myself that as well as the other person. So I'd sort of say I'm the world's worst drawer of stick figures, which is okay, because I do have creative bones in my body. I love to do photography, and I think some of my photography is very creative. I also come up with lots of ideas outside of that, which is very creative. So just talk to me a little bit more about that idea of creativity goes beyond just the arts, drawing or music or sculpting or...
Sure. It's all connected, right? Everything is connected to everything, says Leonardo da Vinci. And if you look at great creative minds like Leonardo da Vinci, and also some work that was done by Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist in the States and really big on LinkedIn and Twitter. But he's talked about a study in his book Originals, how nonconformists move the world. And he talked about all of the Nobel Prize winners in science from 1901 to about 2000 and so, to 2005. And a majority of them had an arts background. So that's something to consider. And so while I say I'm really adamant, creativity is not only the arts. So people are saying, oh, I'm not creative. I can't draw. I can't sing. I can't dance. Number one, you're saying these things out loud. So your brain and yes, I do have a brain on my desk because I'm all about manipulatives. But your brain is recording everything you ever say, you ever hear, you ever see, right? Your subconscious. And then, so we need to change our speech and say that we're growing in our creativity. Anything you were artistically creative when you were 2, like no one told you, And so because of culture, because of comparison, restriction, or whatever happened in people's formative years, now a lot of them are carrying this into their adulthood. And we say that we're not creative because we think it's only artistic, but it's seeping into other areas of science, of just writing, business, sales. And so it's all connected. And we have to understand that it's a growth mindset we want to have. And so you may not be a Monet or whatever, but you can experiment. You can just really make art. And so I'm also looking into the neuroaesthetics of what's going on in the brain when you're analyzing art, when you're producing art and music. And so there's a part of the brain called the corpus callosum. It's the middle part. It's kind of like the bridge between the two hemispheres. And they talk about how people who engage just listening to music, but especially playing music, that area improves, it gets stronger. And so it's kind of like the interchange on a freeway system. I'm not sure what your freeways look like down there, but in Los Angeles, there's some heavy traffic going on, right?
Yeah.
And so imagine a one road going each way on an interchange in Los Angeles on the 405 and the 101. That would be crazy. We have 5 lanes each. But that's basically your brain. When your brain is doing music and doing these artistic adventures, you're strengthening these communication ways, basically. And so it's really important to understand that creativity isn't solely the arts. It goes into every field. And if you're human, you're creative. Even if you're an animal, there's several animals who show us creativity as well.
Well, I've got a story about that yesterday that I observed with our cat, but go on.
But the arts training helps you in non-arts areas. So people who have arts training are more observant to see ideas, connections, right? Creativity sits on cognitive skills such as divergent thinking, metaphorical thinking, unusual associations, combinatory thinking. And people who are able to do these processes, they're already embedded within the arts education. You have to think metaphorically, right? If you're doing a dance about, I don't know, I just did one on LinkedIn about freedom, where I found music and got several dancers together. And I said, well, what does freedom mean to you?
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's really what we're trying to do. Allow everyone to call themselves a creative, not only the small creative team in your organization, which speaks to the rest of the organization that you're not creative, which is not true, but everyone should have the ability to call themselves a creative.
Yeah, I love it. And also on that theme of music, there's so many, like as you said, Nobel Prize winners that came from an arts background, but there's so many scientists, like Einstein was a very gifted violinist that I recall. And then you mentioned Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, there's a really good book by Michael Gelb is the author. It comes with a music CD, and it looks at, I think it's called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci, but it looks at the values and philosophies that he espoused, and it looks at it from the artistic perspective, and it brings music in, and it's a really fascinating book that kind of ties in together all these concepts that you're talking about.
Yes, I actually went to the museum where they were showing his exhibit, and I took my son. And it's really, I think, where we have to get back to is definitely as far as K-12, what does it look like to have an education curriculum that thinks like Leonardo, that's high in curiosity, that allows these unusual associations happen authentically, that isn't so rigid as far as, here's the standard, you learn this, this, and this, as opposed to allowing some freedom of thought within their experience. And so there's a lot of work to be done for this new future work, because AI wasn't where it was now 40 years ago. We could get by with some of the stuff we're doing now, but no longer can we get by. Our next generation, they're going to be living by a new set of standards, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And also I'm very strong on this idea that, we have this technology. I mean, there's a technological revolution still happening. I think we're still in the early days of that. But what's happened in the last 50 years, for example, in technology, I think people are starting to be lazy in thought, be lazy in connecting with other people at a human level, and abdicating to the technology to do stuff. And so I'm all about making marketing and podcasting as part of that human again. So I think this idea of the creativity and connecting together at a human level with other people to be creative as a collective is a great concept. So you actually trademarked the term intercultural creativity.
Yeah, I'm surprised it was available. But people have
Yeah.
used the word creativity, and then cultural competence is a concept, and that's the combination of them both. But I looked and looked, and then I went to the U.S. Patent Office, and they looked and looked, and no one was using it.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. So I'm interested to hear what you do with that. Um, yeah, so the I'm not creative fallacy, I think we've hopefully debunked that a little bit. So what are some of the things that we can all do within organizations, within our community to foster that intercultural creativity, that whole idea of bringing those communications, those conversations to bear that generate new ideas without judgment, and in a way that when somebody comes up with this wild idea, that we actually foster curiosity and look to enhance that idea.
Well, the huge, I think, shift, at least where my work is going, looking at almost something I might even coin intercultural neural creativity, is we can actually see a lot of what's going on in the brain now in the past even 5 years that we couldn't see 10, 15, 20 years ago. The MRI actually just came on the scene in the 2000s, late 1990s. So it's really not that old. I mean, I was in college at UCLA in MRIs doing tests with my professors, and they were like, it was a brand new thing, right? So now that we have this backing of the neuroscience and what it's saying, hopefully people will take it more seriously. And I believe that once we understand the importance of having your brain at rest, when your brain is quote unquote resting, it's not resting. There's work going on. And if you look at on my podcast, episode 66, Dr. Michael Platt, he has the wonderful book called The Leader's Brain. And there is a section talking about the networks, right? The brain is a series of networks and very complex. But when you're on your task network, like your focus task network, like you're doing bills or doing spreadsheets, your innovation network, also called your default mode network, is quiet. But when you're just kind of daydreaming, or when you're in the shower, or have you been driving, you're not really, you're driving, but you're not really paying attention to like, okay, let me brake now and let me gas, your mind is kind of wandering. That's when your innovation default mode network is on. And that's where these sub ideas can kind of get into your conscious, and also just understanding the different brain states that we're in when we're awake, when we're sleeping, when we're kind of coming out of sleep. Some of your craziest ideas come to you right when you're waking up, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason for that. And so now that the neuroscience world isn't so separated from the masses, from, the common man and woman and child, and people like me are, because I work with children, I have to be able to communicate complex ideas in a simple way. And so we are now finding out, what can we actually do? And so one of the things we can do is allow our brain to wander, to use our imagination, take that word seriously. It's not just for 3-year-olds, it's for everyone. Everything that you see around you came from someone's imagination, right? And so for us to really look at, well, what's imagination training? You go to sales training, right? But have you ever been to imagination training or curiosity training? We look and say it's cute for a 3-year-old to be curious, but when a team member's curious, they get in trouble because it's not a part of their job description, right?
Yeah.
And so it's things like that organizations say we're creative, but then we shut it down on the back end. And we're Dr. Alison Huysmeister out of USC. She's on my podcast, episode 74, and she talks about the curiosity conundrum, that the C-suite, the curiosity level of the C-suite is in a direct alignment of the level of surviving and thriving for the future of their organization. So if the curiosity levels of the C-suite is down, you're looking at Blockbuster, Kodak, and Radio Shack type of output, right? But if the curiosity level of the C-suite is up, not only are they accessing the resources in front of them and exploiting them correctly, they're also looking ahead around the corner. And we need more people who know how to look ahead around the corner. The last thing is creative ideas can come from anywhere. And so this whole hierarchy of no one can get to the CEO, and if you're an onboarded new employee or working in the front lines or the administration or janitorial staff, good luck getting your ideas anywhere. Your best ideas are hidden in the warehouse.
Yeah, I
And
remember.
so we need to get those up.
I remember a story, and I'm just trying to recall. I can't recall the company now, about some major innovation that was a huge commercial success that originated from a simple question that a cleaning lady had posed somewhere, and the organization was set up in such a way that her voice was actually heard. I don't know whether they had a suggestion box or something. And I remember that was talked about as a prime example of a curious organization. And I thought, we talk about, and I was in the corporate world at the time, and I'd lived through lots of experiences. I mean, I worked for CAFFE when they went under, I left just before I left the sinking ship. But I was a young graduate then, and I could see that the C-suite there was not very curious about this new invention. They said, we just need to make better film. But that in my corporate world, there was a lot of conversation around this idea that, this is a great model where even the cleaning staff that simply come in to keep things clean can have a voice, are able to express some ideas that could end up being a huge commercial success. And I thought, but we're not living that here.
Yes, I actually share a few stories. I'm creating a course, that hopefully will be on LinkedIn, and it's about someone, the Alco aluminum company, in the late 80s and all the way to the 2000s, but how one of their best ideas came from one of the workers who had it for a while. But until the new CEO came in and said to the whole company, our number one priority is worker safety. And so once he said that, and he gave them, his phone number, and he made sure he made contact with them, then they saw the amount of trust. So trust is very much correlated with creativity and innovation, because now people trust that they can speak up and they won't get ostracized or reprimanded for speaking up new ideas that might go against the way that things have always been done, right? And it turned, the whole company around, and $1 billion of new revenue, because an idea finally got out, and it wasn't brand new. He's been holding on to this idea for who knows long, but he didn't have trust. There was no trust in the organization, so he kept it to himself. And I wonder how many organizations that's happening right now too.
Yeah, when you think of the possibilities there, it is quite exciting, isn't it? Because I agree with you. I'm sure there's a lot of ideas there that are not getting out because of a lack of trust, and because it starts with the idea of, why do we do things that way? Couldn't we do it this way, right?
Yes, and that's where the intercultural comes part, because I do a lot of training, like DEI training, like unconscious bias training. And when you hear of unconscious bias, you automatically think towards, gender, race, right? A lot of diversity and equity, and inclusion, and belonging topics and demographics that we normally focus on. But I also say this is affecting not only the people and their ability to rise, which affects the creative output of the organization, right? But it also affects our ability to look at one another and see each other as creative beings. And so if I'm unconsciously biased against you or discriminative against you, even whether I know it or not, right? The way I see you is affected by my cultural lens or this unconscious implicit bias. And so I'm not going to talk to you during meetings or try to elicit more ideas, or make sure you have the floor, or you have opportunities to have stretch assignments. My actions are curtailed by this unconscious bias without me even knowing it, or maybe I do know it. And so we have to understand there's millions of stories of people's creative potential just cut in half and just shot down because of the cultural part. And so intercultural creativity allows us to work on things that could be cutting down our creativity, the way we see ourselves and the way we see other people, and also looking at just the way we observe. You and I, we are from different demographics. We observe the world differently. We're in different parts of the world, so there's things that you would catch that I would miss just because I haven't had those experiences, and vice versa. So if we, like today, if we come together and we share each other's stories, now I get a glimpse of your world and you get a glimpse of mine. And as Dr. Michael Platt and Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett talk about, our brains are literally changing structure when we share each other's stories and perspective shift with one another. And that's the fascinating part, that even though we're not 3-year-olds, you're right, with a growing brain, our brains are still plastic. And until the day we leave this earth, they're still able to shift structure if we do the work.
And look, thinking about the neuroscience, we're constantly, particularly if we're curious and looking to learn new things, we're constantly building new neural connections inside the brain, right? So your metaphor from before about the superhighway, strengthening that superhighway to allow more traffic to flow.
Yes. And one other point I want to make sure is we understand is being creative and taking a risk to do something new. Your brain is a predicting machine. It loves to predict, and that's why it loves routine. It loves to stay around people where I know what they're going to do. I know what they're going to say. I know these people, they're my tribe, right? Because I can predict. So to go outside of that to people who you don't know what they're going to do, they're part of a different demographic or different lived experience, or you're going to do something creative where you don't know the outcome. It is a small risk. You probably calculate a risk, but still you don't know the exact outcome. That is a higher metabolic fee for the brain, right? The brain runs on energy and everything. And so your brain has a certain amount of energy. That's why sleep is so important. And so if you're already taxed, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating, if you're in toxic relationships, which can take and strip you from your energy as well. If you're having all these negative things go on, you have no more energy to be creative. You have no more energy to go outside of your tribe and go meet people from different lived experiences. And so that's why I love this work, because it's all connected. And that's why I love bringing the brain into the middle part of it, because if you know your brain, you know your life. And so you're able to, and this is for organizations. When you look at your wellness plan, when you look at your DEIB plan, your diversity plan, it's directly correlated with your innovation and creativity plan. They are not separate.
Yes, everything works together. And one of the big things also for the brain, I think that we often overlook, you didn't mention it there, is hydration. So keeping hydrated, because those neural networks that are constantly forming and reforming and strengthening, that requires a lot of liquid, a lot of water.
Yes. Water, very important. Thank you for bringing that up. And it should be the first thing you drink and the last thing you drink, just to bookend your day.
Your day, yeah. Love it. All right. Now, there was one other thing there that I wanted to explore further, but that's right. The idea of daydreaming. You mentioned earlier how important it was to kind of let the brain be at rest. And I had a conversation quite a while back now with Dr. Fiona Kerr, a neuroscientist, on the InnovaBuzz podcast. I don't recall the episode off the top of my head, but she pointed out that this idea of daydreaming, and kids do this, they kind of suddenly they just look up and you think, where are you? You've gone. You're not here with me. And she said, we need to give ourselves the freedom to actually do that. Usually when we're alone, obviously, because we don't want to interfere with the relationships or conversations we're having with others. But that having the freedom to give yourself permission to daydream is where a lot of those ideas come from, because then things bubble up from the unconscious.
Yes, and because of the MRI and the technology we have now, they can actually spot in your brain where this is occurring. It's really fascinating, and what happens in the split second before. And so, and I've read conflicting research. Daydreaming is really good, and then someone's like, daydreaming isn't good. Like be in the moment. And so, I'm going through it, but then I take in my personal experience. And now even with my son, if he is looking out the window, I used to say, Sean, Sean, come back to me. But I don't do that anymore because he's with his thoughts. He's having fun with himself. And you're right, as long as we're not in a conversation and then he just stops and starts daydreaming, there's a few social cues you want to be mindful of. But I'm not Jewish by faith or by blood or anything, but they have this thing called the Sabbath where they take time on a day, and my family started to do that as well. Just really Friday night, we kind of no work, and Saturday no work till Saturday night, and it's just time to just spend time with family and just sit in nature and just breathe and be in the moment, feel the wind on my skin, feel the sun, and whatever that we're choosing to do. And then I do read and write and reflect, but the thing is no work for me at least. And I think there's a reason why that has been implemented into their faith, because they may have known what it does for your inner creativity. We're producing creativity outwardly, they say, for those 6 days, but that seventh day, they just want to rest and just have some inner creativity going on.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of practices that come out of the different faiths that are worth exploring in that light too, because it's like we lose track sometimes because it becomes a dogma in the faith. This is what you do, and so people don't question it. Well, why is that? So part of what we talked about earlier, that curiosity of why is that and challenging the norm, part of that is say, well, I'm not challenging that is the wrong thing to do, but I'm curious, why do we do that? Because it's kind of become routine and we don't understand why we're doing it. So therefore we don't appreciate what it's actually giving us.
Mm-hmm. And we have to, the pandemic is still going on, basically, more or less, and at the taping of this recording, but we have to look at some of the gems that we kind of have to pull from it, despite all of the heartbreak and loss. And I believe it woke a lot of people up. It showed us a lot of things that were hidden, and exactly what you said, it caused me to ask questions of, wait, why are we doing, what am I rushing to? What am I rushing to? Why am I always rushing? Even with my son, I'm like rushing. I'm like, Genein, stop. Why are you rushing? And, thankfully in our family, we didn't have any human loss, but, a few job loss and just, opportunity loss, of course, travel loss. But it really opened my eyes to start questioning why I'm doing things and to make sure I am doing things because it brings me joy and it's a part of my purpose, as opposed to just, the busyness. And so I hope it isn't just for me, but for a lot of people, that really opened our eyes to reevaluate our choices of time, because in the end, all you have is time, right? Once the time is up,
right.
Time is
most
up.
Precious. Yeah, that's the most precious resource.
So, and with that, and this is, I believe this is why intercultural creativity is an idea that has met his time. Had I brought this out to the world 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I don't think it would have hit the way that it's hitting now. It came to me, you're going to love this. It came to me, the word came to me at the end of 2020, November 28th, 2020. And then I wrote the book, and the book came to me at my doorstep, November 28th, 2021, the same day, because I record everything to the day. The idea came to me, and then I got the actual book in my hand that a year later. And so it's meant to get out there now.
Definitely time has come. That's that's an interesting coincidence, and you can argue maybe there's no such thing as a coincidence.
I personally believe no, but Yes, everyone can think what they think, but just things for me, things line up the way they're supposed to line up when they line up.
Yeah. And I think that's a good attitude to have, because it does give you permission to be curious about yourself. And you were talking earlier about all the differences that we have. You and I are different gender, different race, different nationality, different backgrounds, different ages, different whole lot of differences. And yet there's so many similarities. And I don't necessarily look at the differences first and say, okay, here's our differences. I do see the differences and say, wow, here's an opportunity to learn from somebody who's got a completely different perspective. And so often I'm curious about myself and my reactions first, and so why am I reacting like that, and what are the opportunities in that? And that to me is, I think, it's certainly a powerful tool for me to kind of start off being curious about my own thoughts, and then taking that curiosity and say, well, what are the opportunities in this conversation, for example? That's kind of how I approach the podcast conversations.
And I love it. And it shows me your level of self-awareness. People are saying the word empathy now. You're hearing that word out there, right? Empathy and psychological safety. That's a new word on the scene in the past, 3 to 5 years or so. But people have to understand that empathy sits on your ability to be self-aware. That if you're not self-aware and emotionally aware of your own experience and able to have emotional granularity, that is your ability to label your emotions and to understand your set of actions after you have identified that emotion. That's coming from the work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. That if your emotional awareness and self-awareness is low, it's very difficult to be able to interpret and sift through the emotions of others. And so a lot of my work and my training, my corporate training and coaching, we look at self-awareness. And this is where the arts come in. This is big because most cues come from most information for emotional intelligence comes from nonverbal cues. And so you can say, thanks, 3 different ways. Thanks, thanks. Thanks, right? I said it 3 different ways, and you got 3 different emotions from it, correct?
That's right. Yeah. And you didn't even use the sarcastic version.
I know. Thanks. Yeah, totally. That's like the normal one, right? And what training in music does, it makes you sensitive to pitch. Speaking is pitch, intonation. And if you watch, there's a wonderful TEDx education video. It's called "What Music and the Brain." I highly recommend it. It's like 3 minutes long. I even show it to my kindergartners. It's very fun to watch. It's from the TEDx educational part of their platform, and it shows you the different elements of music: the rhythm, the pitch, the emotional content, the form, and how your brain separates them, figures everything out, and puts it all together. That's what's going on in your brain. And so people who have trained themselves in that from 5 years old or 10 or 15, even if you start now, your brain's like, okay, all right, let's figure this out. And so when I come to you and say, thanks, I'm supposed to, thanks, your brain is hearing the emotional tones. And because you've had all this background training in music and in dance or whatever, you're 10 steps ahead of someone who has no training.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know my children were very gifted musicians, still are. And in all the training they had early on, it was I learned so much about how music influences that, and the pitch and the cadence and the emotional expression behind that, the way how one little piece of music can be so expressive in different ways. The same piece of music can be played in so many different ways and express so many different things. And now I can listen to some music and obviously there's a connection or a historical connection with some event where my kids played or something, and I can get really emotional depending on how the music is played, and I can listen to the same piece by another musician expressed in a different way, and it kind of just, oh yeah, there's that piece of music again. It's kind of like,
Yes. And if you see the video that I did share on my LinkedIn about freedom with Sheku Kenna Mason and his family playing.
Yeah, with that family, yeah.
Yeah, they are amazing. Out of London, and he played at Prince Harry's wedding. And yeah, just their interpretation of that song of freedom, it just, I've cried a few times. And I was crying while I was editing the video. I'm like, what is going on with me? But I got to see it in movement, where the dancers heard the song and then they expressed it. And I got to see it in painting, where the painter heard the song and then she expressed it. So really that's the crux of my work, allowing people to be creative in all fields, but also saying, you know what, we got to bring the arts even back into adults' life. The arts aren't just for K5, you know, it's for us all. If you are human, you have the right to express yourself visually, in movement, in music, in sound, and in words.
Love it. All right. Well, this is fabulous, Genein. I could go on talking for hours on this topic, and maybe we need to have a repeat performance so we can do that. But I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 5 questions I ask of every guest, and the idea is that you'll leave our listener inspired to go and take some action as a result of what they hear today.
Yes.
You ready?
Always. I was born ready.
You were born ready. That's great. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
They need to first believe that they are innovative and then conceive. Just do it. Just even if it starts small, just do it.
Baby steps, yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of, I talked about my children's music, the piano teacher that they had who was just brilliant. I asked her once, how can these 6, 7, 8-year-old kids remember this 40-minute piece of music? Not just the notes, but all the expression, where the entries are with the orchestra, because it's a piano concerto. And she said, it's very simple. It's like eating pizza, one little bit at a time.
I agree. And the muscle memory and the music memory, it's a powerful thing. At the brain. That's why you can remember a song from 20 years ago, because of the power of music memory.
Excellent. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
I travel, and sometimes you get a dart and you throw it at the map and you go. So it's living like that for me. That has helped me open up my mind map.
Excellent. Well, what have you done over the last 2 years with these, with the pandemic and travel restrictions?
You'd be surprised. I have a 4-year-old, so he was 2 when the pandemic hit, and I was suddenly lost daycare. And so I had a 2-year-old retrain me to learn how to observe. So that's what I did. Right. And I saw my grounds that I lived on in a whole new way. So even though I couldn't get in a plane and travel to Egypt or wherever, I got in my tennis shoes and re-traveled my land in a whole new way with a 2-year-old.
Excellent. Well, that just shows, there's opportunities to be curious in a different way, even if you can't get out and about in the world. What's a favourite resource you use most often?
Resource?
Yeah.
My favorite resource that I use. I love to use props, so I speak metaphorically through my props. So I guess this is my elementary school training, right? But part of my work is, adults are adults, but they like to laugh too. They like to have fun too and play. And so why does this relegate it just to the elementary school classroom? Why can't I bring this into Chevron and to, the big corporations and get people thinking in a whole new way with their hands, right? That translation of ideas and the rendering into physical form of the ideas. That's a resource that I use. And Play-Doh. Play-Doh's a great resource.
Play-Doh, yeah, brilliant. And there's a reason why I guess that's it's kind of a standard for teaching young kids. And that's because it reinforces like the words you say and maybe you show some pictures, but having those props actually reinforces that. So that works for young kids. Why wouldn't it work for adults?
And I think it needs to be working more for adults because we have more cultural biases and limitations placed on us because of functional fixedness. We won't go beyond the original function of an item where a kid will. They'll turn a cardboard box into an airplane or a spaceship or a ship.
That's right, yeah.
Right? So, yes.
Excellent. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a client on track?
Purpose. The brain is geared for story. The brain loves narrative. The brain loves story. The brain loves purpose. And so if people are only seeing their job description and not seeing the purpose of their organization or their project or the people they're serving, whatever level that you choose to align it with, then that can get distracting. But I find out it's really easy to get back on track when you have that bigger narrative in place.
Yeah, it's a sort of start with why philosophy, isn't it? I'm getting really clear about that. All right, and what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate yourself?
When my students write their essays for scholarships, I ask them, is this an essay that anybody can put their name on? And, a lot of my students, they're from lower income homes, or a lot of them are first generation college students, or a lot of them have some struggles, but a lot of these things other kids have too. And so what I do is I sit down with them, or I sit down with some of my coaching clients, and I try to find that diamond that only pertains to them. Like I have one student where she was playing volleyball on her high school team and she got a slight concussion, but she was okay the next day. But, but watching that, and she had to sit out the rest of the season. I'm like, well, not too many people can put their name on that essay if you decide to write on that. Like, not you're right.
Yeah.
But if you just give me the normal, the normal three things that mostly everyone at your school has, then you're not really differentiating yourself. And so I want people to look at their struggles in a new way, perspective shift around their struggles, things that you didn't think was deemed worthy to share. So I stuttered growing up, and I still stutter today. I have a speech impediment. I had speech therapy for years in elementary school. I never shared that growing up until I was about like maybe 35, 36, did I really start talking about it, even though you could hear it, even though it was always there. But I was so ashamed of it. And then I perspective shifted around it. And now I share it as a part of my story. When I'm doing keynotes in front of, thousands of people, I share that, oh, by the way, I stutter, but here I am, speaking on global platforms. But that speaks to their heart. Like, well, if she can do that, then I can do things too, despite these struggles that I'm having. And so I want people to look at their struggles in a whole new light, and then be vulnerable and share them, because they could be the gateway for someone else to come into their freedom.
That's a really powerful perspective shift, and it does give other people permission, doesn't it? Because most of us have self-doubts, and they may be related to something we do, like stuttering. They may be related to other things. Even the most influential and powerful people in the world have self-doubts. We might look at them from the outside and say they've got no reason to have self-doubts, but they do have. And so to embrace those things and share them, it does give other people permission to kind of do more.
Yes,
and
yes.
ignore those self-doubts, or share them with others and get that connection going.
Yeah. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Genein. This has been really great. Now, where can people find out more about the work you're doing, your podcast, your video channel, your books, and maybe even get in touch and say thanks for what you've shared today?
Sure. Well, I am all about connecting with people, right? We are better together and more creative together. So I can be found on either GeneinLetford.com, GENEIN, Letford.com, and my business website is CAFFE Strategies, CAFFE Strategies.com. And that's where you can find the books. I have the 7 Gems of Intercultural Creativity, where we go through the 7 gems deeply. And I talk about creatively and culturally, how do they affect our ability to be creative together. And then my son and I wrote a book called I Am Creative. And he was 3 when he wrote this. So now he can always be an author, right?
Yeah.
And he just goes through his day of being creative. And then I tell the parents, teachers, and caregivers at the back kind of what's going on and what to look out for and how not to accidentally squash their creativity.
Yeah.
And I'm very active on social media, mostly on LinkedIn, but I am on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I just want to get this word out so people can live their best interculturally, creatively designed life in focus.
Beautiful. And we'll include all those links in the show notes. And I think it's really cool that you co-authored that book with your son.
Yes, and he's working on his next book. He is obsessed about sprinklers. So if there's anyone who needs to know about sprinklers, you just wait. Him and his dad are working on that book. And then our other book is the Creativity and the Brain. So him and I are working on that book together about how kids and adults, but kids can figure out what's going on in their brain before they're my age, before they're in their 30s or 40s. They can figure out when they're 5, okay, well, how does my brain work and how can I better self-regulate it and my emotions?
Yeah, which is a very powerful tool and skill to have. All right, do you have some parting advice today, some action that the listener can take away as a result of today's conversation?
Sure. Your creativity isn't for you. Your creativity is for me and for them and for all of us. So everything that I'm being creative about right now, I'm not harboring it and keeping it unlocked in my room, right? I'm out here sharing it. And so I want people to understand that when you don't see your full creative potential, or when you're allowing fear or cultural limitations to stop you, you're actually robbing from us and generations to come. And so when you finally get on your own creativity within you, and then whatever you want to share with your organization or wherever you are, you're blessing us and those who are yet to come.
Very powerful message. Thanks for that. And finally, Genein, who else should I get on the show and why?
You need to get on the show, Mr. Justice. He is looking at healthcare and the arts and telling people their diagnosis with artistry and helping them have more of a holistic journey to health using the arts. I was blown away, very fascinated. Wow. I'm trying to get him on my show as well. And then some more neuroscientists. I'm a girl fan about neuroscientists, and I'm trying to find more women neuroscientists as well.
Oh, I should connect you with Fiona Kerr.
I would be highly grateful for that.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. First of all, what was the gentleman's name again? Mr. Justice.
Justice, yes.
Yeah. So, that sounds fascinating. I'd really love to get him on the show. So we'll see if we can jointly approach him to come on 2 podcasts.
Yes.
All right. Thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. As I said, I could go on more, and maybe we need to have a second round where we talk about some of those gems. We talk about, I'm fascinated about the process you're going through to encourage your son to kind of explore his creativity and normalize that going forward so that it doesn't get crushed by the system later on. And that he's a book author at the age of 3 already, which he'll have for the rest of his life. Yes. So thanks so much, Genein. I really enjoyed it, and all the best for the future, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you so much. Stay creative.